If you give me just a current event, a development, my instinct is to ask, well, what happened before that?
Yeah.
And what happened before that? And then what was before that? Like, when do we get to the firmament? You know?
Jelani Cobb is the Dean of Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism, a staff writer at The New Yorker, a political analyst, and a Peabody Award-winning filmmaker. He is also the author of several books, including his most recent work titled 3 or More is a Riot, Notes on How We Got Here, 2012 to 2025, which he is here to talk with me about today. Since the Black Lives Matter movement emerged more than a decade ago, Jelani has been reporting on the most consequential events from the front lines, and 3 or More is a Riot takes previously published pieces and updates them using present and historical context, turning these dispatches from the past into a retrospective on what our modern fight for racial justice has meant for the nation and for Jelani himself. I'm your host, Chelsey Weber-Smith, and this is American Hysteria. I'm so excited to welcome Jelani to the show. I feel like this is going to be a really interesting interview, so thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So you have a new book out. 3 or More is a Riot is the first part of the title. Mm-hmm. I would love if you wanted to explain, first of all, why you chose that title for your new book.
Sure. First, thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here and to talk with you. And the title of the book preceded the book. I had this phrase that was kind of bouncing around in my head. And, it was inspired, during the time when I was covering, a really difficult story.
Yeah.
Which was the massacre at the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. And that happened in 2015, in June of 2015. And I started thinking and kind of riffing on South Carolina history and where that, atrocity fit into it.
Right.
And, I was thinking about, kind of demography and, the fact that South Carolina was shaped by so much of its colonial and actually kind of early American history being shaped by the fact that it had a Black population, majority Black population. And in 1739, there had been a slave revolt called the Stono Slave Rebellion. Mm-hmm. And it inspired a tremendous degree of paranoia and concern among the white population of the colony, largely because they were like, we're outnumbered, by these people.
Yeah.
And if they rise up in significant numbers, that could really be a big problem for us. And in the aftermath of that, Negroes, as Black people would have then been called, were prohibited from gathering together in groups of 3 or more. And so a definition of a slave revolt was 3 or more Black people together outside the presence of a white man.
Yeah, yeah.
And it also occurred to me that the civil code in many different kind of municipalities defines riot, rather the criminal code in many different municipalities defines riot as public mayhem committed by 3 or more people. And so...
That's so weird, yeah.
Yeah, it is. But I had been covering lots of things that entailed, kind of social uprising and discord and, covered Ferguson and Freddie Gray in Baltimore. And I'd been in all of these scenes and I was thinking about this 3 or more terminology.
Right.
And it was like 3 or More is a Riot.
It's so hard to imagine 3 people rioting.
Right.
It's a very odd, image.
But for law enforcement purposes,
right.
I said to a friend, I was like, if it's just 2 of you, then it means you're just acting a fool.
But 3 or more.
But if you can find a 3rd friend, you can have a proper riot.
You've got yourself a riot, baby. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's an incredible title, I think, for what you were setting out to do with this book. So
Thank you.
would you let us know kind of what you were setting out to do? I know these are like big things, but like what questions were you hoping to answer with this collection? And then kind of also, how did you create this collection as a person, like in the physical world, moving around the country?
I've been working on another book about race, democracy, and demagogues. And, so nothing that's pertinent at all to current affairs.
I've never heard of any of it. Yeah.
But I started out by sifting through and revisiting work that I had done on those themes at the New Yorker, and, had started working, thinking through some ideas. And so I created this document, and I was pulling articles from the New Yorker and dropping them into this Google Doc as stuff that might be useful for me to reread and think about. And the document got longer and longer and longer. And then it was 100 pages. Then it was a couple hundred pages. And then it occurred to me that, this was really a collection in its own right. And it was a way of starting the conversation that I hope to continue in the book that followed it. And so that's really where it came from. And then the work of actually turning the collection into a book, that entailed, some curation. There's always, something great that winds up on the cutting room floor, or something that you're very enamored of that's on the cutting room floor. And then I added contextual notes, which started out as kind of like footnotes. But then they kind of grew into mini essays in their own right. So at the end of a piece, if I read something from 2018, I would use the intervening, 6 years, because, I finished this project in 2024 at the end of 24, the beginning of 25. It was like the beginning of 25. And so I just thought about what had happened in the intervening years, and like how I was thinking about the same issues that I'd written about then, whether or not I thought the piece held up. I told, one friend that revisiting your work, especially when it's like a decade or more of work, is also an attempt to see what your batting average is.
Wow. Yeah. What an interesting format, right? It's like being in conversation with your past self a little bit. And I mean, I feel like there's such a power in having the immediacy of what you were writing about while it was happening, because there's going to be contained within that almost like emotions and your own experiences that are easy to forget in retrospect. Like if you were writing about all of this just from your perspective now, it would be a really different book than you allowing yourself to be in conversation with the past self that experienced this. So it feels like a great format.
Yeah. And I tell my students this all the time, that all writing is autobiographical.
Yeah.
Some of it is explicitly so, and some of it is implicitly so. But if you revisit your work, from even 5 years or 2 years earlier, you can chart often the evolution and development in your thinking, in your style, and your approach. Think, oh, I wouldn't use that word now.
Yeah.
Or, wow, I really, was very colorful in that turn of phrase. And I don't know if I would have done that in the same way now. And so it's like, it's a kind of re-examination of the self, as well as a re-examination of what were then current events.
Yeah. And in my own way, I can relate to that, making this show for the last 7 years. It's like, I don't ever go back and listen, but I remember, it's like, I know. And I think it's so interesting because you're saying the same thing where you're like, your language, the things you choose to write about and how you choose to write about them says so much about the larger culture that it was existing within. So it does, even if it feels outdated in certain ways, it's holding this truth that would be lost if it weren't being done in the moment. So I just think it's a really fantastic way to cover what you did in this book, which is so much of the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the tragedies that spurred that on. And I know that you were going and reporting physically from these different epicenters of events. So what was that like for you to actually experience these historical moments yourself? And how did that affect the work that you would make?
I think that because I have a background in history.
Oh, you do? That's cool.
Yeah. So I have a PhD in American history. And, my first iteration of my career was as, a history professor. And I should say, so I started out in journalism. I went to graduate school at Rutgers University in the 1990s. I did a master's and a PhD there in that subject. And I worked as an academic historian, for a good block of time.
Yeah.
Before I kind of gradually and almost inadvertently migrated back into the journalism world full time.
Yeah.
But I've tended to think in ways that synthesize, my journalistic methodology and my historian methodology, and putting those two things together. So if I'm in Ferguson, I'm thinking about what's happening on the ground, but I'm also thinking about the kind of long sprawl of history that preceded this. Ferguson is a suburb of St. Louis, and, St. Louis was a place where some of the most crucial battles over housing policy, were fought in, the course of the 20th century. A place where people had legal battles over restrictive covenants that allowed you to restrict who a person would be allowed to sell their home to.
Oh, yeah.
If you purchase your home, they would often have riders that said you could not sell it to anyone who was Jewish or anyone who's Black. And, those were ultimately thrown out by the Supreme Court. But one of the big cases fought over that, was a St. Louis case. St. Louis was where one of the earliest American housing projects were built. St. Louis is where one of the first American suburbs was built. And, those things combine to kind of foreground some of the issues that were happening in Ferguson, as you quickly realize that this was also about housing and real estate and belonging and these other kinds of things, in addition to being about policing. This is the story, of course, that emerges after an 18-year-old Black male is shot and killed fatally shot by a white police officer, and everything that emerges from that.
And first of all, I always like to thank our academic historians, because you all make what I do so much easier. I feel like it makes what you're talking about so much richer to be able to be both a historian as well as a journalist, because you're seeing all of the ghosts that are leading up to the moment, whereas so many people, especially people who are against what they think is Black Lives Matter, or what they think are these, pointless riots. It really, what you can do, and whether people listen, that's another question, right? But you can just illuminate hey, yes, it's about this moment and this killing and this tragedy, but it's also about how this tragedy illustrates 400-year history in this country. And I think that that's always going to be very, very helpful. And again, it doesn't mean it'll be helpful for everyone, but the people that, are at least present enough in themselves to listen, that's going to be so much more powerful and help people understand so much more.
Yeah, I think, for me, that's the only way I know how to tell a story.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a virtue or not, but
it's a virtue.
It's the thing that I think about, because if you give me just a current event, a development, my instinct is to ask, well, what happened before that?
Yeah.
And what happened before that? And then what was before that? When do we get to the firmament? A thing that we can say, okay, this is a good starting place.
Yeah.
To get to the thing we're ultimately talking about right now.
Yeah. Go all the way back to Genesis, if you can, the genesis of the issue, right?
Right, exactly.
More after this. And now, back to the show. So, just to get into one of these kinds of stories that we're talking about that has historical context, one of the essays that you wrote was about what I would maybe even call a moral panic about when, Colin Kaepernick took a knee, took that famous knee, and, we lost our minds. And you put that in the historical context of Louis Armstrong. And so I was wondering if we could get into the similarities between those two stories.
Yeah, it was really interesting because, this was 2017 and this was early in the first Trump administration. And Donald Trump had taken aim at Colin Kaepernick, whom he saw as unpatriotic for kneeling on the sideline during the national anthem. And, Colin Kaepernick was, making, as he articulated, a protest around the police use of excessive force and the number of African Americans who have been killed, amid questionable circumstances in exchanges with police. And the theme that made me think about Louis Armstrong was specifically the language that accused Colin Kaepernick of being ungrateful. Now, here you have a world-class athlete, one of the best in the world at what he does. And, the product of an incalculable amount of training, practice, dedication, and all those things. And
personal risk.
Yeah. He plays a sport where people get killed. And we know that. And on the other side of it was the sense that there was some sort of entitlement that he had been kind of given, the wealth that he possessed or the prominence that he enjoyed, and that he should kind of adopt a posture of gratitude and almost subservience as a result of it.
Right.
And, the dynamic of it, the weird dynamic of it was that however much money Colin Kaepernick was being paid by the NFL or by, his various endorsements, he was making far in excess of that much money for them. He was generating far more money for them. And it reminded me of an incident in 1957 that involved Louis Armstrong. And, of course, 1957 was, famous because that's when the Central High School integration crisis in Little Rock, Arkansas took place, became a national crucible. The state of Arkansas and the Arkansas school system was resisting the Brown versus Board of Education declaration that segregation was illegal in public education in the United States. And Orville Faubus, who was then the governor of Arkansas, famously deployed the National Guard in order to prevent the 9 African Americans scheduled to be the first 9 to integrate the school. And the National Guard was being used to prevent that from happening. President Dwight Eisenhower saw this as a kind of direct insult to the chain of command.
Yeah.
This has been the Supreme Court order, and a governor was ignoring it. And so he federalized the National Guard and ordered them to protect the students who were entering the school.
Right.
In the midst of this, Louis Armstrong was doing a interview with a high school journalist.
Wait, the journalist themselves was a high school student?
The journalist was a high school student.
Okay, great.
And he very thoughtfully inquired about how Mr. Armstrong saw that situation in 1957. And up until this point, Louis Armstrong, who was one of the best known Americans in the world in those years, he had been this very genial, avuncular kind of figure. He smiled and he was, exceedingly friendly and gentle. And he took pains to not project any demeanor that might have been seen as threatening by white people.
Right.
And it's a very familiar kind of gesture or positioning that, African Americans or anyone who's in a socially subordinate position is familiar with.
Yeah.
Well, he spoke his mind. He referred to Governor Orville Faubus of Arkansas as a, quote, ignorant plowboy.
Wow.
But the actual thing was that was a euphemism that the newsroom came up with and got Mr. Armstrong to go along with. But what he'd actually said was that the governor was a motherfucker.
That does hit harder than
it does hit harder. And he used
several
several different colorful variants of the term, I should say, adjectival modifiers, for the precise type of motherfucker he called him. But
before we move on, sorry, why ignorant plowboy? Is that a something I just have never heard before, or did they really just kind of create that in the newsroom? Yeah,
the kind of what's come down through history was that he had this transcript of the interview, and it's Louis Armstrong in a way that people have never heard him, but it's also language that people won't print.
Right, yeah.
And so they're kind of like, how can we convey this? And so he is basically calling him a hick or a redneck.
Okay, there we go. That makes sense.
Yeah, but without, the the obvious weight that would come with other terminology.
It is kind of wild that they would just put those words in his mouth like that. That's just very strange. But,
yeah,
who knows? Okay, please continue.
So the State Department, which had been sponsoring tours of jazz musicians in order to kind of broker goodwill in the world, where, jazz was tremendously popular and it's this American art form. And so they were engaged in what people, referred to as cultural diplomacy. And, they immediately began canceling Armstrong's performances because he was no longer kind of saying the comforting platitudes of kind of American diplomacy speak. And the thing that there was outrage. His concerts, his domestic concerts were canceled. He had death threats. He got all sorts of insults. And the thing that people said about him was that they thought he was ungrateful or that he was uppity.
Yeah.
And not to say that this person was a musical genius who was foundational to the subsequent development of an entire genre of music and who had worked hard all of his life to perfect his craft and to develop a skill set that allowed him to be, rewarded, allowed him to be remunerated in a way that, he deserved. And what was said was that he was ungrateful because it was the idea that he was being given something.
Right. And also, like you mentioned with Colin Kaepernick, it was like he's also making a lot of money for people.
Yes, he's making a lot of money for record labels, music venues, nightclubs. He's making a lot of political advances for the State Department,
And doing so much for like New Orleans itself as a city.
All of these things.
Yeah. It's just, it's quite insulting, to say the least.
Yeah. And so that's how I kind of looked at it,
Yeah, it's a direct line, really. And I guess you could say he got canceled.
Right. Literally.
Literally canceled across the board. So was he, in your knowledge, did he come back from that sort of slowly, or did people just forget about it, or did that really affect his career going forward the way that it did Colin Kaepernick's?
No, he eventually came back from it.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of pace of the civil rights movement, was cranking up, and there were all sorts of other things. And, a lot of people, Louis Armstrong had been ridiculed sometimes by younger, more militant African Americans for having such a kind of conciliatory stance toward white America. And then he makes a statement that, for a moment really puts him in the hot seat.
Yeah.
But people eventually move on, and he, continues, with his musical career and with his kind of public standing and so on.
Right, right. And then he does get this. And the only reason I'm really bringing this up, and I don't know what I'm talking about, but I was recently in New Orleans and I went to Louis Armstrong Park. Is it Louis or Louis? I have heard both and I never know.
Yeah, I've heard both. And
Okay.
I have always kind of preferred Louis.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've heard people say both of them.
Okay. Yeah. So I was in the park named for Armstrong, and it's, of course, a lovely park. It's so nice to walk around in. You've got this giant statue of him. And, you know, in my own kind of ignorance, I just was enjoying the park without knowing its context. And I don't know how much you know about it, but, you know, it's obviously, like so many parks, built on 10 blocks of historic buildings and displaced, you know, a huge amount of Black residents. So there's just like an irony that continues, I think, even in...
That's amazing. No, I did not know that background of the park.
Yeah. And again, I don't know a ton about it. I think I read like a sign or something, you know what I mean? And I looked it up and I was like, oh, well, I guess that does make sense in a really American way. But yeah, just to add a little bit to the conversation there. It continues, I suppose.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So while I'm reading your essay, while I'm listening to you talk, something that it's reminding me of, like, you know, largely because it's happening within an NFL context, and we're talking about Colin Kaepernick, we now have this new moral panic, whatever you want to call it, like racist creation of Bad Bunny being this scourge on the Super Bowl because, you know, he's critiqued the immigration policies of Trump and he wants to, or he will do the performance in Spanish. And so people are freaking out to the point that we're getting this alternative Super Bowl show.
Yeah.
Do you see connections there?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the same sort of cyclical development, you know, that we see again and again and again. And, you know, I think panic is a good term for it. Never has there been, you know, this degree of conversation about who's going to perform at the Super Bowl, at least not from a political sense.
No.
And musicians, you know, perform in, you know, whatever way they choose, and it's not thought to be any other statement, except that we are in a moment where American immigration policy has literally said the speaking of Spanish is a basis to detain someone,
right,
and potentially deport them from the country.
Right. And we have this idea that he does not represent the United States or America at large, which is obviously ridiculous for many reasons. But I think that though it's not like this narrative of gratitude, it is this narrative of who is deserving of this position, which is ridiculous because there's been other Spanish-speaking performers. There have been other, you know, Latino performers over the years, and nobody's batted an eye. But now we have a context in which it becomes a metaphor for where we're at and where our administration wants to take us. I mean, it's just, I went back and revisited it and watched the video of Secretary of Homeland Security Christie, you know, saying that we'll be all over that place. Like ICE is going to be there. So it's this like greater punishment. And I think, and I'm trying to get somewhere, I'm not sure if I'm getting there, but it's like we have this performer who's now representing this entire group of people who are being attacked, kidnapped, disappeared, and they are now being punished as the effect of this person being the halftime performer. So it's like it's coming down the same way it did with Black Lives Matter and with Colin Kaepernick and everyone who participated in that. There's like this trickle down effect because if you're a member of a marginalized community, you are the representative, and anything you say then becomes
right.
You know, I hate saying trickle down, but it works that way, you know.
It becomes fodder, right? And a justification for policies that are directed at the entire community.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, exactly. So I And I just have to read this because this is what she said when they said, what do you think about the NFL doing this and like ignoring your pleas? And she said, they suck and we'll win and God will bless us and we'll stand and be proud of ourselves at the end of the day. And they won't be able to sleep at night because they don't know what they believe in and they're so weak and we'll fix it. Yeah, it's just always good to continue to not normalize the absurdity of these people.
Yeah, 100%. Mm-hmm.
So for just a last question, as we're remembering some of these things and connecting them to the present moment, what else have you taken from your time covering and experiencing the Black Lives Matter movement over so many years now? And what do you bring to the present moment from all of that time and all of that work? What do you want to leave us with today?
I think like what stands out to me the most is that things can change dramatically and quickly. And, we've seen the tides turn, very much against movements around police accountability, around multiracial democracy, around equality. And I think that's a cause for despair for a lot of people. But in going through this, it was really kind of inspiring to think about the sacrifices and the work and the creativity that people did to create a movement that actually is significant and did make contributions and changes. And though it seems difficult to imagine now in the current context, that can still happen. And so I think that's one of the things I take from it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your new book that I hope everyone will go out and buy, because from what I've read so far, I love it. And it's really powerful to go back and remember those things and put them into our context, and not forget how it felt and what it was like in that moment. So I really appreciate your work and I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
This was American Hysteria. Make sure you get a copy of Jelani's book, 3 or More is a Riot. You can find a link in our episode notes. If you want to support our show and get ad-free episodes and bonus content, you can go to patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. You'll get access to Hysteria Home Companion, the other podcast that I make with our producer Miranda, where we tell you stories related to the topics that we cover or stories that we know that you'll love. And you'll get access to our other ongoing series called Dispatches from the Field, where I talk at you for about an hour about whatever I want to talk to you about, unedited and in a total stream of consciousness. Our most recent episode is about all of the strangest jobs I've had in my life, and I promise that you have no idea what to expect. That's patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. If you go to AmericanHysteria.com, you can pick up some of our merch. 100% of the profits go to the Samir Project, a Palestinian-led mutual aid group who are on the ground in Gaza delivering food and supplies to displaced families. While you're there, you can also leave us a message on the Urban Legends hotline about a tale that you remember from growing up or one you've heard recently, and we might do an entire investigation about it. That's AmericanHysteria.com. Another great and very easy way to help out our show is to leave us a 5-star review on whatever app you use. You could do it right now, and we would be very grateful to you. American Hysteria's producer and editor is Miranda Zickler. Our associate producer is Riley Swedelius-Smith. This episode has additional editing by Kaylee Jasperson, and I'm your host, Chelsey Weber-Smith. Thanks, as always, for listening, and I hope you have a great